Welcome to the 2021 Annual Ethics and Compliance Training. I'm Jake Fector, Compliance Manager. Very excited to be with you today. I know our audience is on the edge of their seats right now, wondering what the theme for training will be this year. But before we get into it, let's first take a look at the last few years. So if you remember, for those of you who were here, in 2017, we rolled out the red carpet for our Oscars theme. In 2018, we brought you the breaking news from CNN, Compliance News Network. In 2019, we continued the news theme and brought you a TV classic with 60 Minutes. And then last year, we went on our virtual road trip covering all of your favorite compliance topics. And then again, when we were thinking about 2021, we wanted to push the boundaries and come up with a new and creative theme for annual compliance and ethics training. So without any further ado, our grand reveal will be compliance podcasts. We really believe this is a type of content that really no one else has dipped into over the last 10 years. Their podcasts are new and exciting, and I don't think anyone's really doing them right now. So we're excited to kind of explore this space. We'll be spoofing some of our favorite podcasts in an attempt to hopefully spice up sometimes a training that can be a little bit dry. And so these podcasts will be available wherever you get your Buckingham content. And so this will be posted and available for training and have to be required training by the end of the year. So we're going to jump into our first podcast, and it's Stuff You Should Know, Compliance, hosted by Jake Fector and Sal Papa. So Sal, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to co-host this with you today as we sort of dive in a little bit explaining what compliance is. Sal, welcome.
Thank you, Jake. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. Stuff You Should Know podcast. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Exactly. And so with the podcast, we're going to cover the basics of compliance with the hope that you have a decent understanding of the topic by the end of this 15 or 20 minutes. And so the word compliance, if you look it up in the dictionary, again, the goal of the podcast, for those who are familiar with the Stuff You Should Know podcast, is to really break things down into a very clear and succinct way. So we'll start very high level and talk a little bit about how compliance actually applies to our world as well here at Buckingham. But if you look up compliance, just to break it down a little bit, one of the most common definitions is conformity and fulfilling official requirements, or the act or process of doing what you've been asked or ordered to do. But when we think about, again, how compliance deals with our world, some of the basics that we wanted to go over to make sure you have a handle on the screen here, we're showing three different sort of either rules, agencies, or parts of compliance as it relates to Buckingham. So again, just to set the stage here, the first bullet point here being the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, is the government agency responsible for regulating investors, securities markets, and firms like Buckingham. And so the SEC was established just after the Great Depression in the 1933 and 1934 Securities and Exchange Acts. And again, most of that was a response to sort of the stock market crash and the Great Depression at the time. Our country was really looking for more regulation post those incidents. So that's why formation of the SEC was a big marker at that time. The SEC's mission is simple: it's to protect investors and maintain fair and orderly and efficient markets. So that's who we're governed by. That's who we report to in the event of any type of examination or audit. That's sort of our main regulatory body. Next on the screen is the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. So what is the Investment Advisors Act, or what you'll hear known as the Advisors Act? Again, that's a U.S. federal law under the SEC's framework that regulates and defines the roles and responsibilities of investment advisors. Again, folks like Buckingham Strategic Wealth and Buckingham Strategic Partners. That's the main framework we look to when we think about compliance and complying with different regulations. One of the main components of the Investment Advisors Act is this concept of the fiduciary standard or fiduciary duty. Sal's going to talk a little bit about that standard on the next slide, but again, that fiduciary duty is part of this Investment Advisors Act and part of the main framework for SEC registrants and state registrants who fit within our space and scope. Under that same framework of the Investment Advisors Act, the SEC or the regulator publish a set of rules under that act. And so again, that was formed in the 1940, again, sort of think post-depression, post-market crash, as a way to hopefully build more scale and scope to our industry. As the SEC has continued to progress, they roll out rules under this act. And so one of the main rules that we adhere to and work with related to compliance is known as the compliance programs rule, or rule 2064-7, sort of one of the biggest rules in our space, and candidly a rule that drives Buckingham having a compliance team. So the components of this rule are pretty straightforward. First, firms need to adopt and implement policies and procedures reasonably designed to prevent any type of fraud or violation of federal securities law. Second, they need to review those policies and procedures on an annual basis. And then third, firms need to designate a chief compliance officer who's responsible for administering some of those. So again, just to set the stage and review these very quickly before moving on, the SEC is Buckingham's sort of core governing agency. The main rule or act that governs Buckingham is known as the Investment Advisors Act. And then one of the main rules under that act that sort of leads to us having a compliance department is known as the Compliance Programs Rule. But I teed up this concept of fiduciary duty, Sal, and I'll kick it over to you. Anything else you'd add on the Investment Advisors Act or fiduciary duty as we move forward here?
No, I think that was a great overview, Jake. Certainly there's a lot of history there, and I think a lot of very interesting history. And it's great to think through or go back in time and think about those different points in history and some of those highlights that you shared, including the compliance programs rule itself. And inclusive of that, the requirement to appoint a chief compliance officer. Thank God. So I have a job.
You're still here. Yep.
All right. So talk about stuff you should know, right? Number one, and probably, if we cover anything today, this being the most important, and that is fiduciary duty. Under federal law, an investment advisor is a fiduciary, of course. And if you look at a recent SEC release, and the title of that release was Commission Interpretation Regarding Standard of Conduct for Investment Advisors. And when we talk about the commission, that refers to the 5 commissioners of the SEC. That release essentially reaffirmed and in some cases clarified certain aspects of the federal fiduciary duty that an investment advisor owes its clients. And this duty, it's basically comprised of both a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. It's principles based, and it applies to the entire relationship between an investment advisor and a client. In other words, the investment advisor cannot place its own interest ahead of the interest of its clients. The fiduciary interpretation that I just noted certainly confirms that the SEC's longstanding view is that an investment advisor must at all times serve the best interests of its client and not subordinate its client's interests to its own. So when we look at each of these duties, the duty of care basically requires an investment advisor to provide investment advice in the best interests of its clients based on that client's objectives. And then under the duty of loyalty, an investment advisor must eliminate or make full and fair disclosure of all conflicts of interest, which might incline an advisor consciously or unconsciously, and that comes from a famous Supreme Court case, to render advice which is not disinterested, such that a client cannot provide informed consent to the conflict. So that's full and fair disclosure, if you will. And certainly a key component of an investment advisor's obligation is to act in the best interest of its clients. And I think at the end of the day, one has to look no further than one of our firm's core missions, and that passion to do right, Jake. So with that, let's talk about my favorite slide in this whole deck, Jake. The pillars.
The pillars. It's a beautiful image. And I think it does again, when we think about our pillars, it's our elevator pitch, right? If we had 60 to 90 seconds with someone to talk about how Buckingham thinks about compliance, what would we talk about? And it's the pillars on the screen here. And so I know we've had these for a number of years and always like to display them during training because I think it's a concise way to think about compliance, and that these pillars work left to right, right? Our people and our culture are probably the foundation of these pillars. We partner with the right people. We have a great culture of compliance, and it really starts there. Moving on with the other pillars, compliance is a controls-based function, right? We have to have policies and procedures. We have to make sure we're following those controls. That's an important aspect of these pillars, as is training and testing on those policies, right? Doing trainings like this, trying to be proactive as possible with our associates, with our advisors, so that they can identify areas of risk in the field working with clients. And then lastly, testing, right? This concept of trust but verify. We need to make sure that we have all of these policies, we're doing all of this training, but let's confirm things. Let's test things on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis, to make sure we're complying with the rules we need to. So again, that's our quick 60 to 90 second pitch here as we think about compliance. But another concept you'll hear in this space is this idea of creating a culture of compliance. And we certainly try to do that with our pillars. But three other ways in which we try to foster a culture of compliance. First of which is hopefully creating a tone at the top. This idea of our board of directors, our other business line leaders, hopefully doing a great job of ensuring that compliance is prioritized. And this has a trickle down impact, right? As other team leaders and associates witness this and see our leadership embodying these values, that has a strong sort of correlation and hopefully has a strong idea of which compliance is spreading throughout the organization at all levels. Secondly, of how we try to create a culture of compliance is by being proactive. And I think of this as sort of a revolving circle with three different components. First of which is our team's role in developing sort of training and educational programs to help identify risk. Second, then, is associates and advisors having the tools to serve our clients by identifying and sensing those risks. And then the third component, when and if a situation comes up in the future, let's say, again, a trade error or some type of client suffering diminished capacity, just drawing upon two issues I've helped advisors with recently, teams know to loop us in and be proactive with those situations, because oftentimes the earlier that compliance is involved in those situations, hopefully we work towards a better outcome for all. And then lastly is aligning compliance with sort of other teams and priorities. And so our team works in a shared services capacity, in that we do actually help both business line achieve their goals and objectives. And so compliance having a seat at the table for those bigger projects and initiatives is actually critically important, so that the firm is properly evaluating the legal or regulatory components of a project. So speaking of sort of those bigger priorities and projects, the firm has rolled out this new initiative of objectives and key results. You'll hear that termed as OKRs as well. And so I know our team and other team leaders have been working to build out OKRs during this past year, and we're excited about more training and more build out of this. Our team has actually built a firm-wide objective. So there's probably 5 to 7 of those that, again, at the highest level, we've stated that this is one of the few things that should sort of lead the firm in terms of our objectives moving forward for the year. And this is one that we think is kind of going to be omnipresent, that we don't think it's going to fall off, because it's this important, and it's fostering a culture of compliance and integrity across the organization. Sal, anything you'd add here about sort of creating that culture, or how important this firm-wide objective is here?
I think culture is such a hard item to measure, just as ethical behavior can be a hard item to measure. But I think it goes back to sort of the core concepts that it not only is tone at the top, but it's also a continual focus, like we're having with our OKRs, and that concept of integrity. It's a ongoing, omnipresent thing that we have to stay committed to overall.
Great. And speaking of OKRs, We know that there's some additional firm-wide training on this concept to come. Again, team leaders and executive leadership team has been trained on it, but associates will get that training in the next few months. But we've actually been asked to preview more about OKRs. And we actually reached out to some celebrity friends of ours from the field and are lucky enough to have a celebrity guest actually lay the foundation of what OKRs are all about. So let's take a listen.
For this last one, I think I know what this one's going to be. This one is... someone knows it. Someone's doing it. So now this is yeah. No.
You know, it's like a cold pigeon in New York City.
Okay, well, so now there's that three different variations of a krr?
Yes.
And what would that mean?
It's just like, you know, like, it depends on the situation that you're in. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, if somebody checks somebody,
oh yeah,
it's like, I didn't know she had all of that in her.
Oh, I see. It's like someone's like, okay, but it's...
Yeah, okay, but okay is pay out. Okay.
Yeah. We've done that already, yeah.
We've done that already.
Why do okay? You might as well go... Oh, yeah, okay, good, all right. Now we all learned. Thank you, Cardi B. This is fantastic. Now we know. I love that.
All right, great. Love that clip from a chart-topping rapper. And, you know, we've gone over compliance. We've talked about fiduciary duty. And of course, neither one of those things are possible without talking about ethics, of course. And when we talk about ethics, we're talking about a set of standards for behavior that basically helps us decide how we ought to act in a range of situations. And in a sense, we can say that ethics is about making choices and about providing reasons why we should make these choices. And ethics certainly goes hand in hand with compliance and is key to a regulatory compliance program. And that's why we always like to emphasize that we talk about our program as an ethics and compliance program, not just a compliance program. I was thinking about sort of this slide and thinking about, you know, how could we sort of flush out a little bit a discussion on this concept of ethics? And I thought about sort of ethical dilemmas, and whether your ethical dilemma has been triggered by a colleague, by a client, or a complete stranger, you're entitled to feel conflicted about that, because it is a dilemma. It's an ethical dilemma, of course. And unlike rules or policies or procedures, and especially the law, ethical dilemmas usually defy an easy or a perfunctory kind of response, because it requires us to uphold a higher standard of conduct, and the choices you face are probably not clear cut, and they may not be obvious to you, maybe just not yet, right? And so that's why I thought about what could be some guidelines when you're faced with an ethical dilemma. Well, I came up with sort of a 7-step framework for the guidelines. And so step 1 would be, well, stop, right? We operate in a fast-moving environment, and we're accustomed to making quick decisions. But when it comes to an ethical dilemma, right, speed is not a virtue for sure. And so you want to stop and identify that ethical dilemma. I think 2, you want to make sure you have all the facts. You need to make an informed and an intelligent decision based on all the facts. Do you have all the information that you need to make the right decision? Step 3, you want to brainstorm your options. You want to list your concerns. Those who love making your list, this is for you. Well, what should be included in that list? Well, what are the pertinent laws, right? We note some there in the tangible column are applicable here, if any. And of course, the securities laws have a foundation of ethics built into them. Or what kind of professional standards or codes of conduct come into play? Again, noted in that tangible column there. Then number 4, after you've kind of thought about your options and lists of concerns, you want to develop possible resolutions. And this is where you want to seek counsel from people with knowledge and expertise in relevant areas and test those different resolutions and discuss those different options related. And then step 5, you want to evaluate those different resolutions. For example, how would your actions, right, the possible resolution you're proposing, be viewed, as a business leader? How would that be viewed if that became public? Or what would a customer or one of our strategic partners say about that decision? Or would that client still want to do business with a company that made that particular decision? And then lastly, what would an industry governing board say? What would the CFP board say? What would our firm's board of directors say? Evaluate those resolutions. Step 6, recommend an action. And then step 7, implement, right? You must implement. So simply choosing a course of action is not enough. It must actually be implemented. Who's going to take the action and when? And what follow-up will there be? So that was sort of my 7-step guidelines for making ethical decisions. And certainly maintaining an ethical organization is no easy task. But each of you have an essential key role in maintaining that ethical foundation. And it's essential to the long-term success of the business. Because at the end of the day, a business without an ethical foundation eventually will run into trouble, as has been proven time and time again over history. So with that, why don't we talk about sort of get out of the abstract a little bit and get into some of the tangible as it relates to ethics. Jake?
Yeah, thanks, Sal. So when we think about the tangible nature of something like ethics as it applies to our business, that comes to fruition by way of our code of ethics document. So we've got 2 primary documents that sort of govern our compliance program, one being our policy and procedures manual, the second here being our code of ethics. And so we're going to go through some of the high level areas of that document itself. We think it's a good practice whenever we're doing these joint training sessions to go through and think about our code of ethics. We've got the standards of conduct and fiduciary duty sort of surrounded by the components of our code of ethics here. I think that paints a good picture of, right, as Sal previewed this idea of ethics having a lot of abstract nature and aspects to it, but the more we can drill down into some of the tangible areas here, which we'll do on the next few slides, I think the easier it is to comprehend. So let's spend a minute or 2 on gifts and entertainment requirements. Per our code of ethics, supervised persons may not accept or give any gift in an aggregate of $350 per year. So that's the threshold to keep in mind for gifts. There's also different reporting requirements for registered representatives, as well as members of our fixed income department. As it relates to entertainment, so long as the expense is reasonable and both parties are present, there is not a minimum threshold in terms of the reporting requirements or any pre-clearance requirements for entertainment. However, if the associate is not in attendance for this entertainment, the gift thresholds would come back into play, again, being $350 here. Of note, again, some special provisions related to any type of entertainment for government officials and or entertainment related to any of our registered reps who work on the SA fund side. The next concept I wanted to go over is this idea of insider trading. So if you remember our code of ethics trading bubble, we had a bubble for trading protocols. And why we have procedures in that area is to prevent insider trading from happening within our organization. And so advisors and or those who are client facing, or really anyone in the organization for that matter, may come across some type of material non-public information, or what you'll hear abbreviated as MNPI, about a specific security, about our company, about clients we work with. And there's different ways to come into that information. One is a one-to-one relationship where you hear that from a client or from a vendor or from a prospect. Another idea is the second bullet here of tipping. This idea and concept of communicating that MNPI to someone else who then purchases or places some type of sale within that security. So again, that's what we're trying to prevent here. And how do we do that? How do we mitigate insider trading? Well, one is having a policy, right? Having a code of ethics that talks about the reporting requirements, reporting on those assets within Schwab compliance technology. Our team then does forensic testing on those trading accounts. And then also just training, making sure folks are informed and aware of our policy. That's usually the last bullet point there to try to mitigate any type of insider trading risk. As it relates to pre-clearance requirements, we've got 4 buckets on the screen here. First, and this is a little new and something we previewed last annual ethics and compliance training, is that any new brokerage account needs to be pre-cleared. The reason behind that, we're working towards a fully automatic brokerage data feed system within SCT. So that allows us to get away from paper statements. We need to set up the account appropriately and give pre-clearance of a new brokerage account so we can get that get the best experience for our associates to automatically get that data fed in, but also for our compliance team to have to review thousands of accounts. That's just much easier when those accounts are electronically fed in through our system. The second bucket here for transactions, so some specific funds and security we require pre-clearance for, one of which is Focus. Again, part of our parent company structure, they are a publicly traded company. Because of that affiliation, all partner firms must pre-clear transactions and have their associates pre-clear those trades as well. The second is the set of SA funds. Again, for those who are familiar with the sort of legacy Loring Ward side and the SA fund side of our business, for the BSP side right now, anyone who is buying or selling shares of the SA funds offered through DFA, those need to be pre-cleared as well. The third one here is the Jensen Quality Growth Fund. So that is a new security sort of on our pre-clearance list. A member of the Buckingham Strategic Wealth Advisory team has decided to take a board position within this fund. So very exciting opportunity. Because of that affiliation and sort of as a risk mitigator here, we've decided to put that on our pre-clearance list. It's again, probably not something that either our clients or our employees will be trading in. But again, we want to make sure we mitigate that risk, so we've listed it here. And then last is this bucket of hot issues, IPOs or private placements. Those require pre-clearance before placing trades. The last two here, any outside business activity, reminder that needs to be pre-cleared. We may have reporting requirements on a Form U4, an ADV 2B, or just some disclosure we may need to list in our ADV, depending on that OBA. And then lastly will be exceptions to that gift or entertainment policy or political contribution. So for those who are, again, looking for some type of gift that exceeds that $350 mark, that would need to be pre-cleared as an exception. And then political contributions, we're outside of an election cycle now, but when and if we get back into that election cycle, these will likely come up. So there's thresholds in mind, similar to our gift thresholds, depending on the type of candidate you're entitled to vote for. You may require pre-clearance of that gift. One last item for our code of ethics is this concept of confidentiality and reporting violations. So we talked about this concept of fostering a culture of compliance. You all on the front lines play a big role in that. So safeguarding confidential information, keeping that within our 4 walls of Buckingham is paramount. And that could come in a number of different ways. Could be client information, could be proprietary information about Buckingham or Focus, could be third parties that we work with and their proprietary information, but security of that data is, again, of the utmost importance. And we need to make sure we're protecting it by way of secure data exchange, using ShareFile to send things. Again, we'll preview this concept of, little things matter, think before you click. This is one big area here where we want to make sure we're protecting that data. And then lastly is just reporting violations. There's a number of outlets which we've got on the screen here in which employees can escalate issues or violations of our code. And also keep in mind, we've got an anti-retaliation policy and a whistleblower form on SCT to allow associates to confidentially report an issue with our code or just any type of issue. Again, that's a great outlet for folks if they'd like to confidentially report something. So now that we've covered our code of ethics and the document that governs our ethical behavior there, we actually wanted to end this stuff you should know compliance session talking about some of the little things. And we have on the slide here the little things that matter. This is a theme we've been talking about as a legal and compliance team, because I think it tells an important story that as much as we want to talk about some of these bigger topics of ethics, compliance, fiduciary duty, there's little things, there's little day-to-day actions that actually add up and make a material impact on how our business operates and the decisions we make. And so, Sal, I know we collaborated on this list. The first one here, I'll take and maybe kick it back over to you, but is verbal verification, right? Especially for money movement requests that require it. Making sure we're doing those verbals and doing them appropriately and getting them documented helps bolster our controls for some of the, I think, most important transactions a client may be going through, thinking about a wire, or again, some of those SLOA setups that require that the first time we're doing it. Those front-end controls can do a lot in preventing fraud.
Perfect example, Jake, of the little things that matter. Of which, by the way, I think we maybe should think about a spin-off from our Stuff You Should Know podcast to do another podcast,
you're right.
The Little Things That Matter.
Tune in, stay tuned.
Tune in.
Yes.
I don't know, we could use a little marketing help with it, but I think, this is brilliant. It's almost like the little things that matter that have a material impact,
That's
right? And you gave a great example of one. And one of the interesting things about our role and our responsibilities is that we do get to get involved in and investigate issues that arise. And of course, we get the benefit of hindsight when we're investigating those issues. But a common theme comes through when we've conducted those investigations. And a lot of times, it's the little things that actually matter a lot. And Jake, you gave the perfect example of a simple exercise of a verbal verification and not following that, the material impact that could have in the event that we didn't follow that procedure. And then we share a number of other sort of examples on this screen, a tremendous number of which go to, of course, documentation, but then also, right, we developed or adopt certain procedures, whether they're a compliance procedure, an operating procedure, we adopt those for a reason. And so if you're skipping that procedure, well, that could have a significant impact in the event that you didn't follow that procedure. Did you submit your reporting within a required deadline? Well, we don't put deadlines, at least from the compliance perspective, on something just for fun, right? Those typically are deadlines that are driven by rule. And if we miss that deadline, it's technically a violation. So for example, code of ethics reporting, right? If you're late, we actually have a code of ethics violation that we must write up, document, and then that can reflect in the aggregate a weakness for our ethics and compliance program. And so are you meeting, the required deadlines? And then kind of the last two, right? Pause. Are you, from a cybersecurity perspective, are you looking at that with that level of professional skepticism that you have to look at it on? Or paperwork that comes through that may be suspicious, right? Are you pausing and bringing in other colleagues to say, this looks suspicious? And then are you escalating that, right? Are you escalating red flags? A key element to any ethics and compliance program is, number one, spotting an issue, or at least saying this just doesn't look right. And then two, escalation. Are you escalating that issue accordingly and appropriately? So the little things at the end of the day do actually matter. And so we just wanted to make sure to emphasize that, and we appreciate that focus on the little things, because at the end of the day, when issues do arise that go wrong, we want to make sure we took care of all those little things, because then it doesn't turn into a bigger issue. So Jake, I'm looking forward to also launching that podcast with you.
Yes. And I think all of this ties in well to, hopefully, right, a theme we're trying to emphasize here of fostering that culture of compliance. Doing these little things, submitting everything on time that you need to, I think just helps Buckingham march forward in the direction we'd like to. So we appreciate everyone tuning in to Stuff You Should Know Compliance. Stay tuned for some additional podcasts along the way. Thanks, Sal.
Thank you, Jake.
When was the last time you got a good night's sleep? I know for me, the stress of working from home, plus a new baby, has really impacted my sleep patterns. That's why I teamed up with Casper Mattress. Casper's premium, breathable foam mattress options provide cradling comfort with contouring pressure relief. Casper has a special offer just for our listeners, and not the thousands of other podcasts they may advertise on. Enter code COMPLIANCE at checkout to get an extra 10% off your order. And don't forget about Casper's 100-night risk-free trial. You don't like it? Send it right back, and Casper will send that same mattress to some other customer. So try Casper today, where compliance gets their sleep.
We'll balance the risk in your portfolio. We'll balance your cash flow. We'll balance your spending today with your lifestyle of tomorrow. So you can just balance.
So welcome to our second podcast as part of annual ethics and compliance training called Riskless. We're doing a spoof on SmartLess. For those of you who may have listened to that podcast, myself, Sal Papa, and Jeff Jorg are bringing the same fun banter and excitement, just with a compliance and a risk bend to it. So I'm excited to be joined by Sal and Jeff. How you guys doing today?
Great. I'm really excited for this podcast, Jake. We have a super special guest. Don't you think, Jeff?
I think so. I think people will be shocked and awed, if you will, when we find out who the mystery guest is.
Very true. Very true. So I've done my research right on our guest. I figured I'd give a little bit of background. We always do thorough research on our special guest, and in particular for this one. This particular guest, I believe, speaks 4 to 5 different languages. Not sure if we're talking like investment language or actual foreign language. He is responsible for developing and implementing investment research in a way that helps communicate the merits of our investment philosophy to advisors and investors alike. Wow, that's a mouthful. That is a mouthful. He received his Bachelor of Science degree in business with an emphasis in finance and a minor, by the way, in computer engineering.
Wow. Any guesses so far?
This guy can't be real.
From the prestigious Santa Clara University, of course, the Broncos. He's also earned the Distinguished Chartered Financial Analyst, the CFA. Okay. Talk about a hard exam program and hard road to go through. He has achieved that and has earned the well-respected accredited investment fiduciary designation. I can't keep up. I can't keep up with all of these, designations that he's got. And lastly, has won a Nobel Prize in economics. He's met someone who has won a Nobel Prize in economics. Sorry. So, with that, let's reveal our special guest for this podcast.
Drum roll.
Oh,
me!
Hey, Jonathan.
Everyone's so disappointed. I know.
This is amazing.
So disappointed.
Wow, this is amazing. Great to have you today, Jonathan.
Hey, pleasure being here. Thanks for the invite, and I wish you so much success on your podcast. It's a great idea.
Excited. So I'll kick things off, Jonathan. I know a little bit about your background and know that you do sit on the firm's investment policy committee right now. So would love to sort of hear anything new and exciting that group's got cooking right now.
A lot happened. It's been a busy couple of years, right? So if you remember earlier this year, we rolled out new model portfolios. And, just to pander to the audience on the risk side, right? A lot of the impetus behind those new models was addressing some behavioral risk, right? And that's the risk of, that we saw with benchmarking concerns and people looking different than the markets, right? And so that was a big risk that we sought to address with those new models. Now, as we move forward, we're sticking with some of the behavioral risks that are out there, and we're looking at people's preferences on how they're invested, right? You might call it impact investing or sustainable or ESG, right? There's a lot of terms out there. Believe it or not, Larry Swedroe is writing a book with Sam Adams of Burt Asset Management, what they're out doing on the topic of impact investing in general. So we're looking at it from the lens of implementing a potentially diversified, a well-diversified portfolio using separately managed accounts. And so a lot of research is going to be going into that in 2022. There's been a ton of progress out there in developments on the SMA space. So we think that's the potentially right type of vehicle to use. And so a ton of work has already started. 2022 is going to be really busy on that front.
Jonathan, what's it like at these investment policy committee meetings? Is there a heat lamp? Is Swedroe, right, giving a detailed presentation and peppering everybody with really strong questions? I'm just so curious what actually goes on in the room at these IPC meetings.
Yeah, there's a lot of heat lamps. There's, actually we have some of the best food served there. It used to be great. We'd come down there, it would be a full spread, all these delicious foods and desserts, but now we just have them all shipped to us. So I think the next meeting is going to be sushi from some world-renowned chef. I forget, No, it's nothing crazy or special like that. But we have an agenda. We try to stick to the agenda. It's like most other meetings, just fairly routine. A lot of pre-work goes into it just so it is successful. We cover what we need to. Things run smoothly. But from time to time, there's some great questions and some dialogue and debate that happens. But that's what you want, right? You want that at in those meetings.
I just see Kaiser doing a lot of regression analysis, likely during those meetings. It must be fun.
I think he's doing regression analysis every day. I mean, it's his hobby. I think him and Corey, I just get little Teams messages. Oh, I did a regression on this. Like, oh, I regressed this, and so it's just back and forth. So.
Well, we are a risk podcast, so we ask all of our guests this question. So interested to get your take, Jonathan. Is what areas of risk do you think are the biggest threats to our business right now?
So many ways to take that. I think the biggest risk is a market risk, right? I think as an investment firm, we always have to be mindful that, if the market drops 10, 15, 20, 30%, hey, all hands on deck. We have to figure out what's going on, how we're going to manage that. That's a risk we can't get around. We're working with our clients to get their asset allocations, but we aggregate everything up, and that's kind of our overall market exposure, and that's most likely a 60-40 type portfolio. But so we have a good portion of our revenue always exposed to what the market's doing. So I think that's the biggest risk. Beside that, I think, so that's a risk we don't really have a lot of control on, right? We're not going to go in and hedge, right? Hedging is expensive to try to protect that. And that's not the type of industry. I don't think any financial firms out there doing it, because markets tend to go up, right? And we benefit from that upward movement over time. But that's something that we can't change, right? I think something that we do have an influence on, and, it's been something that we've been talking about quite a bit, just going through all this planning process, is, every individual. And I think, there's, I think we're growing, right? And I have a concern that we lose some of our entrepreneurial spirit, right? And this desire to try to go above and beyond for our clients, right? I can't go out and point to one specific thing that's saying they're not doing it right. But, there's so many related items to this that, we don't want to forget where we came from. And I think that's important as an organization, because I'd love to say that we're the biggest small firm out there, right? Because anytime you talk to a client, anytime you talk to an advisor, what do they always say? Oh, I remember when it was smaller. I loved you know me by my name, right? Like we need to resist those ideas of like, let's start giving numbers to people that call in, right? We're not there yet, thank goodness, right? But there are competitors of ours that give advisors numbers to work with them, and that's just not going to cut it. And so I think that's a concern of mine, is as we get bigger, that we lose that mentality of how we got here and the focus, right? Like, let's not get complacent. Let's not forget about who we're working for and the problems that we're trying to solve. And let's just try to deliver a great experience.
So Jonathan, question for you. You know, obviously with being a risk-based podcast, one of the risks that we think about a lot on the compliance side is trying to stay in compliance and the culture of compliance we like to build. And I'm curious, kind of both your current role and your role on the IPC, kind of how you think about that as enhancing compliance. What are some of the steps that you think that those groups and your team can do to kind of help foster that? Because we want to, you know, we're always curious to let everybody know, all the listeners, just how different groups contribute in their own way to kind of help with this overall compliance area.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that there's a lot of, you know, we talk about being evidence-based, right? And I think you're seeing that pop up in so many areas, right? We have evidence-based planning. We're talking about evidence-based HR policies and ideas, right? And so I think there's a lot that we can do from evidence. And the nice thing with evidence, I think that it does get you, like, it checks a lot of the boxes on, you know, being compliant, right? Because what we're trying to do is keep those ideas of risk in a way that we can do it in a systematic fashion, right? So the way we put our portfolios together, the way we think about our investments, it's all systematic, right? And I think that's where a lot of the you know, that's how you address a lot of potential risks that are out there, is that you put in good policies and procedures, and you're trying to manage to those. Another area where I think, you know, that I like, you talk about how do we foster that culture of compliance, and I think you bring in the compliance and the legal people early, right? You know, some people have that mantra of, hey, it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission, right? Like, well, that doesn't work for me. Like, I'd rather like, let's get some minds at the table. Let's figure out what some of the potential hurdles are, and then work towards, you know, keep that as just some of the information that we're using, some of the guidelines that we have to keep in mind when we're putting something together. And so I think that is just something that I think should be on anybody that's working, or, you know, it could work for projects, but it also can work for service. Like, if something comes up, you get a call, oh, that was weird, that was suspicious, or this message looks strange. Like, ask a question. We have a lot of people here that are willing to help out.
No, and I think it's really important to kind of point to hit on, is just how much easier life can be if you know, if you have a compliance or legal question, to include those folks early, because then the last thing any group wants to do, right, is get down the track and then have to stop and turn around because there's something that got missed at the front end. So I think that's a good point you kind of touch on.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, Jake, did you share some sort of talking point or something? I mean, Jonathan's coming up with a spot on answer.
This is not a paid testimonial. This is not an endorsement. I know there's a new marketing rule.
We didn't place these things, these responses that Jonathan's giving. So I really appreciate those.
Yeah, and you know, it wasn't in my bio, but for a period of time, I played a chief compliance officer at another firm. So I do have a little experience. I don't like to brag about it, or
I knew there was compliance somewhere under there.
Yeah,
we knew it.
It's out there. You got a friend in me. So.
That's great. I mean, you'll join. We have an internal alumni club of former chief compliance officers here at Buckingham.
Do you really? I'd love an invite.
Yeah, we will send you an invitation. We have a significant number, actually. We're up there in numbers. You know, certainly engaged in mergers and acquisitions and transactions. We've got a lot of folks who played that role. So it's kind of it's an amazing club. Amazing.
I don't know, IPC or Chief Compliance Officer Club. I don't know what's more prestigious. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to go to both just to try the food out. So, you know, do a little compare and contrast.
And we're at like 30, I think, Sal, my number, right? Close to 30,
mid-20s.
More.
Yeah. We haven't done the count in recently, Jeff, actually. That's a great point, Jeff. We need to do an updated count on that number. And now Jonathan, who has revealed on this podcast that he also was a former CCO. Who knew?
Big news here. I'm excited. I'm excited to join another club. So I've been looking for something to do on the evening.
We even have T-shirts. You know.
Absolutely. Speaking of clubs, Jonathan, you have the pleasure and the honor of serving on both the BSP and the BSW operating committees. So you do have a unique set of, or a unique lens, I should say, into both those operating committees. We were curious to share a little bit about those experiences and maybe share some things you've learned about some of the risk you've seen kind of on those committees.
Sure. Yeah. From an experience standpoint, hands down, Sal's just a funnier, so the BSW ones, we're always laughing when compliance comes up, but
hey, wait a minute.
On the BSW side, hey, if we never need to have a filibuster, we know who to go to. Jeff, you are our guy if we are looking for someone to fill time. So, what have I learned from those? I think the challenges are different, but they're related, right? I think both firms are trying to grow. The growth, we've got organic growth, we've got inorganic growth on the BSW side that we're working through, but it's great to just see the different groups and the commitment that they have to the people that are working for them, and then the clients, right? So I brought up that my concern earlier about, okay, how do we keep that smaller firm culture? How do we avoid the complacency? And the good thing is, like I said, I'm not seeing that, right? And that's the nice thing, just being on both sides or in both of these committee meetings, is that there are people that are really focused on trying to do what's in the best interest of our clients, right? Nobody's complaining. Everybody's trying to grow this organization and care about the end result. So I think that's a consistency that I've seen there. A difference aside from the compliance individuals would be the BSW always starts in gratitude, which that's interesting, So I don't know if you're doing that with your team or your individuals, but it does lighten up the mood, get everybody talking. And I think that's kind of the point of those sessions. And you always learn something new about the individual, at least what they're going through at that point in time. Sometimes it's bigger than that. So if you're looking for an idea to take back to your maybe even your dinner table, right, with your family, or your team or your colleagues, like that's something that's interesting. And I know there's a lot of evidence out there that supports having those type of discussions and what that does to the brain and to the group dynamics.
Love that drop of evidence right in there, Jonathan.
There you go.
I should have put in your intro the trifecta of committees. I mean, we couldn't have had a better guest than someone serving on the trifecta, right? The IPC, the Buckingham Strategic Wealth Operating Committee, and the Buckingham Strategic Partners Operating Committee.
Hey, are there positions available at this former CCO? I mean, like, is there an opportunity?
That's an alumni club, not a committee.
You're in already. Yeah.
You're in already. You've already met the criteria. It's incredibly detailed, but we already know enough about you that you've met the criteria. We don't reveal the criteria, by the way. It's only unique.
It's made up in Sal's mind. Yes.
Knowledge.
There are dues. We'll communicate that to you later. The bill will be in the mail.
I knew there was a hook.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's a wrap. We want to just thank Jonathan for your time coming on the podcast. First guest. Hopefully not the only guest. Maybe this becomes a weekly podcast, competes with some of the other Buckingham podcasts out there. I don't know, guys. I think we might have something here.
Just remember to like and subscribe below for the future guest.
I mean, we're already up to how many
540 something people are going to have to watch
already?
This. So there's an audience.
So
yeah,
we've already got an audience built in. So
I mean, we're almost halfway to 1,000 folks.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's right.
Isn't that where you get paid on YouTube? I mean, you start putting this out there, you guys can get some.
And by the way, this
outside that's an outside business activity. I didn't want to go that far.
Yes, it's true. It's true. Yeah. It's a free podcast. I mean, that's the beauty of this. This is free
for now.
You get this for free.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all for joining. We will call it a wrap. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What makes a business a business? Is it just four walls and some desks? No. It's people, the right people. You know they are out there, but where? ZipRecruiter helps you reach millions of candidates so you can find the right one for the job. Everyone knows hiring is extremely difficult in our current environment. There is less talent available, retaining employees is becoming difficult, and candidates have a lot of bargaining power. Why not use ZipRecruiter, where they vastly overestimate how many podcast listeners are actually in a position to hire someone? ZipRecruiter, hiring made easy. From the legal and compliance team, I'm Jake Fector. This is the Buckingham Daily. As Buckingham continues to operate from a predominantly remote work environment, I wanted to learn how some of our frontline resources are handling the demanding needs of our clients during the pandemic. The client service and operations team serve a vital role to our organization. Nearly 150 associates from Buckingham process requests, transactions, and paperwork on a daily basis for our diverse client base. But working remotely could possibly lead to additional legal, compliance, and regulatory risk. I dug a little deeper into these issues with some of the team leaders on both service teams to confirm that our policies and procedures were still being upheld as the firm continues to foster a culture of compliance, no matter what obstacles we may be faced with.
Well, now I am joined by Cynthia Chu, VP of Advisor Services for Buckingham Strategic Partners. Cynthia, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Jake, thank you for having me.
Great. Well, we'd love to hear a little bit more about how the pandemic has impacted things within your team, or just to see how things are going sort of in this remote work environment.
Yeah, Jake, one of the most powerful things I've seen during the pandemic, and in 2021 especially, is our teams in BSP Advisor Services coming together and really supporting each other. We have over 70 associates in advisor services alone across 8 different teams, and a third of our team is new with less than 1 year at Buckingham. So we've had a lot of turnover this year, which can present a lot of risk. That also put a ton of pressure and stress on our associates, and they responded with such perseverance and resilience. They faced every single challenge and setback with courage, grace, and good humor. A lot of memes and gifts, Jake, to get us through those tough moments, and a million tiny acts of kindness between associates, both new and tenured. So we've onboarded over 20 new associates. On that note, a heartfelt thank you to our HR partners for recruiting and finding all these amazing new hires in a short amount of time. Our teams have been really welcoming to our new associates and helping them learn and navigate in a remote work environment. And I've also been deeply impressed with our new associates who have joined our teams, having never met their colleagues or team leaders in person, and yet trusting and embracing our team and culture. So while the pandemic has created challenges, it has also given us opportunities. It's really clear our associates have come out of this stronger and closer as a cohesive community. We've had to rise up when we were down, rise up with gratitude, grace, and generosity. Super thankful to our incredible team leaders. Jake, I'm gonna do a shameless shout out here. Amy Michelson, Brittany Marshall, Hunter Storm, Jessica Quillen, Marlena Goff, Misty Labugan, and Natalie Potts, who were mission aligned, helping our associates navigating all this change, not without anxiety and not without uncertainty, but so dedicated to their teams and advisors that they work tirelessly every day to meet the incredible challenges.
Here's Mike Prince, Manager, Buckingham Strategic Wealth Client Service.
Yeah, definitely. I think, obviously not being in the office has changed the work dynamic quite a bit for us. We're oftentimes working in mail and perhaps even getting a little bit better with some of our e-signature tools. And really relying on the communication through our teams, technology and Zooms and everything like that to get everything that we need to get done.
Here's Ray Wong, VP of Operations for BSP.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the most immediate things that come to mind is the fact that it's actually brought our teams closer. So if you look at prior to the pandemic, we had 3 primary locations where we had operational staff. And after we all started working from home, we went from 3 locations to 60 plus locations. And one of the things that we've seen is, whenever folks had questions before, it's easy to pop up their head and ask CubeMate. But with everyone working from home, that was no longer an option. And whenever someone had a question, there was no longer that advantage of being in the same location. So it takes the same amount of effort to reach out to someone, whether they were a CubeMate before or they were sitting across the country. And really, we've seen relationships develop over time that weren't so natural before, and really has brought the team much closer together.
One of the topics we'll go over on for our training is this idea of money laundering or anti-money laundering to make sure, right, we're following procedures that we have in place to get to know our clients. And you'll hear this concept of KYC or know your client procedures. And I know the client service team handles some of that up front for us with collecting sort of client identification or processes we have in that area. Why don't you walk me through maybe one or two of things that you guys do to make sure we're getting to know our clients?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is one that's been really impacted by the pandemic because we have less and less client meetings in the office now. So there's a little bit of an aspect of know your client that's a little bit of a different dynamic now. So one of the things that we do every time we bring a client on board is we put them through the AML OFAC checklist. And my team will run the client's name through the OFAC checklist to make sure they don't receive any hits that might be a cause for concern. And then we'll also always try to collect the identification, a government issued ID up front to make sure that we have that on file. That piece in specifically is one that we struggle with a bit because, especially with clients not coming into the office, we can't just grab their driver's license and go make a copy on the printer. So it's really important that we kind of follow up with that and make sure that we get that on file for every client.
Second, a risk that we always train on is this concept of custody, right? This idea of Buckingham taking on possession of client funds or securities. And there's a number of ways to trigger custody, but didn't know if your team or you personally came across any cases or maybe a case study or two of where we might have inadvertently taken custody and what we did to prevent that by returning it to the client. If you got any good stories there.
Yeah, I actually have one I could share. So, obviously with the pandemic, a lot of the items that we would receive, advisors would normally receive in person, they were receiving by mail, and of course they would forward it to us. So one of the items we actually came across were a stack of stock certificates, and with the custody rule, we cannot accept stock certificates for deposit. So any stock certificates that we receive, we are actually required to return either back directly to the advisor or to the end client. So, with this deposit that we received early on, unfortunately, we couldn't process the deposit. We had to send it back to the advisor, explaining that, due to the custody implications, that they would have to send it directly to the custodian. And of course, the advisor didn't want to have custody either, so they ended up sending it back to the end client. So we use that as an opportunity to just educate that advisor and some of our other advisors on how to properly handle stock certificates.
It's a good question, and one I'll share with you. I think when we talk about inadvertent custody, the thing that always comes to mind is checks made payable to Buckingham, even though they were supposed to be made payable to one of our custodians. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely the most common thing that we see. One sort of funny one that we had this year is we had a client a few months ago who actually sent us paperwork that we were expecting back, but also included with it a $2 bill and asked us to put it in one of their children's custodial accounts. So that was interesting and gave us a little chuckle, but it is actually inadvertent custody because they're sending cash to Buckingham, which we actually took hold of. So my guess is that they maybe were during the pandemic, couldn't go to their bank and maybe deposit things in the way that they wanted to. And so they thought, hey, we'll send this over to Buckingham. But we sort of had to send that back to them right off the bat.
Yeah, I remember you looping in our compliance team on that one, Mike. And I think, again, it's a good case study to say, hey, this was received. Let's think about our procedures, right? We cannot deposit dollars on behalf of our clients. That's not our role, and we're not registered to do that. So again, getting compliance involved, escalating the issue, sending those funds back to the client within the restricted time period here, to avoid taking on custody. I think it's, again, while a nice and hopefully funny story, it's one where we actually follow procedures and process this as we should have. So we've seen it from our side of compliance and legal, definitely remote work and during the pandemic, an increase in identity theft on all sides of our business. And interested to see what you're experiencing, Ray, on the operation side, if that's in line with the trends we're seeing, or what measures we have by way of something, say, additional verbals or additional authorizations we may get to try to mitigate that risk of identity theft.
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing similar trends. Fraud is continuing, and I would say it's actually continued to evolve and increase during the pandemic. With everyone being in a remote environment, I think fraudsters are taking advantage of those opportunities that it creates for fraud, because advisors aren't able to meet end clients in person, and a lot of business is now conducted electronically. So we've seen an increase in attempted fraud attempts through hacked email, where a fraudster is able to obtain the client's information and able to reach out to an advisor. So we've seen in the past a lot of attempted wire fraud. That's actually evolved now to ACH fraud, because they know that there's extra scrutiny involved with wire requests. So we're seeing fraudsters try to set up fake checking accounts. Oftentimes they'll actually find out where the client banks, and they'll open up another account at the same financial institution and send a quick note to the advisor saying that they've updated their bank account number. It's still at the same financial institution, and it'll ask them to update the ACH instructions. And we've obviously been seeing those attempts increase, and we've had to add additional policies to prevent those attempts from going through. So as we have a move money attestation form anytime funds are being moved to a third party. We ask the advisor to attest that they have verbally confirmed the instructions with the end client. In addition to that, we are also doing an outbound phone call to confirm that they have verbally spoken with the client to confirm their instructions. It seems like a duplicated step, but from our experience, we've had advisors who've signed off on the form saying that they verbally confirmed and they haven't. And what we found is when advisors do follow that process where they are confirming via telephone, we haven't had one fraud attempt go through. It's been effective at catching that risk. So, as the fraudsters continue to evolve their tactics, the best thing we found is always just to confirm with the end client verbally. That's always, prevented funds from going out. We've seen multiple attempts. It could be from a small dollar amount to a large dollar amount, but every time that the advisor has spoken to end client, that we've been able to either confirm or have them, confirm that it was legitimate, or whether or not it was a illegitimate request.
I think one thing that you can see is that the speed of transactions can come a lot faster now, because we have the ability to do things like e-signature and e-authorization. Quite often we could have a request come in for money and we can have that out the door within 10 or 15 minutes, which is a little scary for us, maybe more scary for you, Jake, but it is a little scary because of, just the pure speed at which we can get some of this stuff done. One of the things, we've always talked about what's required for a verbal authorization and what isn't, and just to kind of remind everyone what we really want to do here. So anytime there's a third-party transaction, we're going to want to try and get that verbal, we're going to get that verbal authorization. And one thing I could throw on top of that,
yeah,
is like, it's really important that the person who's making the call with the client knows this person and has spoken to them before. We don't yet have software that allows us to, confirm a password or anything like that, where anybody on our team could make the call out to confirm a transaction. So what happens, let's say in a backup situation or with a brand new client, is we may have to reach out to the advisor and say, hey, you know this client the best, would you join me on this call? And just, counting on the willingness to kind of help our team make this as easy and as comfortable for the client as possible. We definitely don't want a situation where it feels like someone random is calling up to get a confirmation of a pretty serious transaction for a client.
I think that's a great point. And one theme we've stressed on throughout this whole training is this concept of kind of just having professional skepticism. It's never a bad idea to sort of take your time on things or get others involved. And I think that's a great case study of, hey, client service may not know this client or maybe a new client. Let's partner on this. Let's take our time. Let's try to have our risk hat on of again, trying to make sure we're talking to the right person on the other end of this phone and not just assuming based on not having a prior relationship. So that's great to hear.
That's it for the Buckingham Daily. I'm Jake Fector. We'll see you tomorrow. As we wrap up training, I just want to briefly touch on 3 different regulatory developments that our team's been working on this year and into 2022.
The first of which is the Department of Labor's PTE 2020-02 rule. So that's the DOL's prohibited transaction exemption, again abbreviated as PTE. The headline here for the prohibited transaction exemption is that there is additional documentation and analysis required by advisory firms who are recommending clients roll over either from plan or IRA assets to a plan managed by Buckingham or an IRA managed by Buckingham. On the BSW side of our business, we've built out some Salesforce workflows to help our advisors satisfy the conditions listed on the screen here. Our compliance teams also helped us get into compliance here with additional disclosure in our Form 8EV and things like our wealth advisory agreement. But again, just want to briefly touch on the change. This is sort of DOL fiduciary rule 3.0, if you will. We may see the rule evolve and change in the next few years, but the expectation right now is that advisors are spending diligent efforts to document and collect proof of why a rollover is in the client's best interest. So one of the other regulatory updates we wanted to review during annual training is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Amanda, do you want to give us some updates of where things stand with CCPA?
Will do, Jake. As many of you know from previous years, the California Consumer Privacy Act, to which Buckingham is subject to, is a groundbreaking privacy law that gives certain rights and consumer protections to California residents. This law went into effect January 1, 2020. As a refresher, the CCPA gives California residents the right to know about the personal information a business collects about them and how it is used and shared, the right to delete personal information collected from them, and the right to opt out of the sale of their personal information. This law brought about certain changes to Buckingham's policies, including the adoption of a California consumer privacy policy, which details how requests can be made, and Buckingham's California personnel notice, the record retention policy, and continual updates to our data inventory system, which tracks what, how, why, and where information is stored. If you have any questions regarding the CCPA or the California Privacy Rights Act, or as I like to call it, CCPA 2.0, which will go into effect January 1, 2023, please reach out to compliance. Back to you, Jake.
Thanks, Amanda. And lastly, there is a new advertising and marketing rule from the SEC that requires compliance of investment advisory firms by November of next fall. So additional training to come on this, but just to hit a few high-level points, this rule has not really been updated for the last 30 or 40 years, so it was very welcomed. I think the advisory space has certainly progressed a lot during this time period, yet the advertising rules behind investment advisory firms and the work we do sort of lagged. And so this, again, was a welcome change and a shift to a more principles-based approach that now has the ability for advisory firms to utilize, within certain restrictions, certain things like testimonials, endorsements that haven't been able to be used before. And so I know our marketing colleagues are especially excited about some of this, more to come on that, but also new changes to how we display performance advertising and or may be able to use third-party ratings and rankings. So we've already worked with the marketing team, the investment analysis group, and other teams, right, who produce a lot of the content for our advisors. But just wanted to preview it here that that's definitely going to be a focal point for our team moving into 2022. So with that concludes our training. Just want to thank you all for tuning in to these podcasts and for being advocates for our compliance team. We know it takes a village to mitigate risk and to build a culture of compliance, and we couldn't do it without you.